Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our latest episode of the Train Like a Trooper podcast. I'm Sarah Stewart, your host, along with Lieutenant Mark Southall, my co-host. And today we have a very special guest with us, retired trooper Jeff Laue. And Jeff, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're a retired trooper. Obviously, you're a very young guy, though. Don't necessarily fit the mold of what our normal retired troopers look like. We'll get into that in just a little while and why you had to retire. But we wanted to start out with you kind of giving us your background, and you grew up here in Oklahoma, correct?
Absolutely. So born and raised in Northeast Oklahoma my entire life. I was born in Miami and grew up in the Quapaw area, and just a small town there in Northeast Oklahoma out on a cattle ranch. And it's definitely been, I love Oklahoma. I've always been a part of Oklahoma. So grew up and graduated high school there at Quapaw High School in 2011. And moved on. Well, actually, I went to NEO College for a couple of years, got my associate's degree there, and then I went out to Western Kansas. I went to Fort Hays State University, and ended up finishing my bachelor's there later on. However, in between that time period, I was able to come back to Oklahoma and then be a state trooper after my junior year of college. So it's been a really good upbringing. I was growing up on a ranch, very blessed with that. My grandpa was a rancher. My dad is still a rancher, and now I'm currently a rancher. So it's just kind of it's been in our family for a very, very long time. And so growing up the way that I did and where I was at was definitely a blessing.
At what point in your life do you remember wanting to be a trooper?
So that began when I was in college. I remember, of course, as a kid growing up, in high school, you always have troopers that would come and talk to us in school, and I always felt like that was pretty cool. You see the troopers, they walk in, they have their hats on, and they're always in shape, and just like you just look at them, you're like, man, like look at these guys are squared away, like we like to say all the time. So seeing that and kind of having that vision of law enforcement or that respect level, you see those guys that would come into the school all the time, and you're like, man, that's super cool. Never really thought when I was younger and at high school that I would eventually be blessed enough to be a trooper. However, when I moved off to college, I had some friends that were in law enforcement back home, so that kind of drove me a little bit. They were always talking to me saying, hey, won't you try to be a cop someday, or try to be a trooper? And and the talk came up one day and with a buddy of mine, and we kind of chatted about it a little bit, and he said, hey, you ever thought about being a trooper? I was like, well, not necessarily. I was off on a different path, and going through college. I was a junior in college at the time, and this was probably oh goodness, I can't remember the exact year, but it was that spring semester of my junior year, and when we kind of had that conversation and that talk, and he was like, well, the Highway Patrol is they're looking for applicants, and we're like, all right, I'll take a look at it. Well, at the time, you had to be 23 years old. You had to have a bachelor's degree. Well, here I am, a 20-year-old college kid that I just had my associate's degree. I was a junior in college, so I didn't fit. I didn't have all the qualifications at the time. Well, so he's like, well, just think about it. Think about it when the time comes. And so I just kind of went on about my life, and a couple months later, I got a phone call. And he's like, hey, you see that Oklahoma changed the law, and you could be a trooper at 21 and have an associate's degree. Well, I turned 21 the very next month, and it was like, oh, well, this might be an opportunity. I kind of thought about it, prayed about it a little bit more, and was like, oh, this might be something that I am interested in. I kind of looked at it as something that I felt like I could grow into and it be something positive in my in my life. And so I was like, you know what, I kind of had that click. You kind of sometimes specific doors open in your life and specific doors close, and so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for that time. I came home after that spring semester and talked to some of the local troopers. I'd known a couple of them just mutually, and just kind of knew of the guys that were working in your area. So for me, it was, I had that positive influence, and I had that influence from the guys that were close. And, I started talking to them, went on a couple ride-alongs, and was like, maybe this is where God's bringing me. Like this is maybe the path that I'm supposed to be on. And so, made the decision at the time to not go back to Western Kansas for my senior year at the time. I still took online classes throughout that fall semester, but I'm going to apply for the patrol. Like this is what I think this is what I need to do. And I look back, and the process was unbelievable. There's a lot to the process. Lieutenant, yourself, you've obviously been through it, and we've all seen it in the process now. And I'm thankful for that process and that time that I was beginning to get into it, and I was accepted into the 63rd Highway Patrol Academy. And so, I'm super extremely blessed for that every single day of my life, because it changed a lot of things. I was on one path, and then, you turn and now this is the path that you're on. So just like I said, it kind of goes back to those open and closed doors. Sometimes one door closes that you may feel as though you're on the correct path, right? And, you don't necessarily pay attention to the other door that opens in your life. However, the door for the Highway Patrol opened up for me, and I'm extremely blessed. I know I'll say it a lot today, but extremely blessed to have been accepted into that patrol academy and have the career that I did have. So.
Who were some of your closest litter mates in the 63rd?
Oh goodness, I got a list of them for sure. In our 63rd, Chris Garner, he and I we actually went back to our home county where we were from in Ottawa County. So obviously he and I were pretty close. Austin Brown and I were really close. Seth Sturgeon and I were close. Chris Ellison, to name a few. And the names go on and on and on. Mitch Callahan, Seth Hudson. There's a lot of guys.
Some great guys out of the academy.
The really good guys. A lot of guys that are making really good moves in the Highway Patrol nowadays. And I think they're making a really big difference. They're making a difference where they're at. Some of the guys have promoted. Some guys are lieutenants now, and so it's like you look back, and we've been out of patrol school, 10, almost 11 years now. So, it's been, there's a big change. Guys move, they move around. They have, some guys are, in different special forces or different areas that, specialties that they're kind of really branching out and doing the little things that we always, were capable or were able to do, throughout a career. And there's a lot of things in the Highway Patrol that we actually get to do. So, those opportunities open up, and especially, in the part of our career that, that we're all in, they're doing a really good job. So I know I obviously left names out of guys that I'm extremely close with, and I can't thank those guys enough. Those guys have been a big support, throughout even my story and my situation. I know we'll get into that, but throughout my career, we had a really close bond, and just as well, coming out of a patrol school, the camaraderie and the bond that you have with those litter mates, not just litter mates, but guys that are on the road too. So. Yeah. It's pretty special.
Did you troop in Ottawa County the whole time that you were in the patrol?
Yes, absolutely. So I was assigned to Troop L, Ottawa County, right out of patrol school, and that's where I spent my entire career.
Tell us a little bit about the other things you did in the patrol too, because you were a part of the emergency response team.
Absolutely. So I was part of the emergency response team, so I was able to be a part of that for I believe 4 years. I got on it after I had a couple years on the patrol. I was able to do that for a few years, so that was a really good time. I enjoyed that. I was also a part-time public information officer as well, so I got to be a part of that a little bit with you, and so that's kind of where we got to know each other a little bit more. So that was definitely a good time. I'm grateful I was a part of Live PD during that time.
Yes,
so
during the time Highway Patrol was on Live PD. Jeff was one of the stars.
If you want to say star, you could say a TV star.
But you said you enjoyed that. There were mixed feelings about that show, but
there was there were positives, there were negatives, there were a lot of different things that came out of that. But during the time, I had to travel a little bit to go to different locations, and it's a little bit different setup, different than what your everyday. Going, throwing the uniform on, going to work, and stopping cars, working crashes. It's a little bit different setup, but that was still a good time. So.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were living in a fire station when you first came out of patrol school. Is that right?
Yes, actually, I was. Oh goodness. So I was. I lived with a buddy of mine. Well, I lived with a buddy of mine. He was a local cop back home, and. We lived together for a little bit, and then I did move into a fire station for a little while. So I did get a little bit of flack from the guys for living in a fire station for a while.
Were you moonlighting as a firefighter?
I was not moonlighting as a firefighter. I was a trooper living in a fire station, and there were things that came with that. It is what it is. But I got a lot of stuff from that. But no, it was a good time. Actually, I lived there for a little bit, and I'm actually super thankful for that because they allowed me to live there at the fire station. They didn't charge me anything to live there. Help clean up and keep things tidy and stuff like that, and the best that I could. And so while I was building my house at the time that I currently live in, so that was a blessing in disguise, to say the least.
There's lots of troopers that do something like that. They get maybe assigned to a different part of the state that they're not used to, and they live with somebody, or somebody lets them live in a place, and that's been going on since the beginning of the patrol. People taking us in, and it's a great opportunity that we have.
It really is. Well, I mean, you think about it, like you come out of patrol school. You're not making a whole lot of money, and maybe depending on your living situations, you have guys that are moved all the way across the state. They may live in one location, but they get assigned to a different location. I was extremely grateful to be, back in my home county, like where I was living currently. So like my situation's a little bit different, but there are guys that that come out of patrol school and they move across the state and they don't have anywhere to go. And I think that goes to show like there are a lot of good people in this world, a lot of people that are willing to reach out and and help troopers and help us. As soon as we get out of patrol school, you talk to some of the other guys, and I think even some of my litter mates. There may be a farmer out in western Oklahoma that may just offer their extra house they have, for a cheaper price than what you would typically pay like in a metro area or like in a different location. So. Like a lot of people do see what we're doing as troopers, and they support the highway patrol. They support us as people, and so I feel like that is definitely something special.
Yeah, absolutely.
So take us up to, let's talk about the incident that where you got injured. It was an emergency response team activation. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It was kind of a situation where we were called as local troopers. It was local. It was back home in our home county. So initially, and I don't know if you want me to just kind of go into the whole aspect of the story, and if you guys want to stop and ask questions throughout it, we can. Yeah. It initially came out as a call, just a local call for the county that we were working in there in Ottawa County, and my phone rang, and at the time it was March of 2020. COVID had just hit. It was kind of we had a lot of unforeseen circumstances that were going on.
Very weird time.
Weird time to not only be a trooper, but just to, in the world. The world was just a weird time. And, we were sitting there, me and some partners, we were sitting there and eating, and phone rang. And said, we were asked, like, hey, did you guys hear what that call just came out? Well, where we were at, we were in a neighboring county, so the radio communication didn't actually get to where we were at, so of course we didn't hear it on the radio. Well, phone call came out and said, well, there's been an incident around Fairland where 2 people have been shot. And so they were saying, hey, we need to respond to this. We need to, go see what we can do to help take care of the situation. Well, so we leave, we take off, and we go up towards the location. And, at the time, my phone's ringing because, I knew all the cops and know all the deputies and the local police that was all up there. And so my phone's ringing like, hey, where are you guys at? Like, what can you do to help? Can you activate your TAC team? Like what can, emergency response, like what can we do? What resources can we help? And that's what we do as the Highway Patrol. We are, assisting agency, and we come in and we help other agencies out in, situation of need. So, they're calling me, asking me, I'm like, well, let me make some phone calls. Let me try to figure out as we're, headed towards this situation. I mean, it was a unbelievably tragic situation.
What was the call that you guys got?
So the call that we initially got was that there was a suspect that had shot one individual in the chest and one individual in the head, and the suspect was still at large, was barricaded in a house. That was the initial call that we got. So, as with our training that we have, with the emergency response team, and obviously I've had a little bit of training, when it came to that, we're, between us and the TAC team working together and training together, and it's not a normal call. It's not a normal call that you get on in an everyday shift, like just a regular shift especially. So, as we're going to this, just as well as I do, the scenario's playing over through your mind. You're constantly thinking like, okay, what are we coming into? What type of situation are we coming into right now? Well, what are the knowns? Well, we know that 2 people have been shot, 1 potentially deceased at the scene. We don't truly know, right? And there's people that are at the scene that are headed to the scene, a lot of local guys, and we were a little ways out. I would say, probably anywhere from 30, 45 minutes away, and that's running an emergency. So that takes a little while to get to where we were going. But and once we showed up on scene, they had set up a specific area, a staging area, like we like to call it, and medical personnel that was there. There were multiple agencies. I couldn't tell you how many different agencies, because especially Northeast, where we're at, Northeast Oklahoma, there's a lot of different tribal agencies. There's local PDs. There's different counties. We had multiple counties that had showed up, because it was a pretty big deal. It was like a super traumatic event. So when that call comes out, of course everybody's going to drop what they're doing. They're going to come help, right, and do everything that they can. So I show up on scene, and I was the first trooper that showed up. All the other troopers were close behind, so we all kind of showed up a little bit at the same time. And I walked up, and a couple of the local deputies started talking to me, telling me, hey, I'm asking, what's going on? What's our situation? Kind of sizing up the scene to see what we can do, what I can do to help, right? And what we as the Highway Patrol can do to help. So talking to them, they had a little bit of a plan that they had that was in place, and what they wanted to do. And my first question was, well, all right, well, where's the suspect at? Does anybody have any eyes on the suspect? And I was told, no, we don't know. The guy's potentially in this trailer. I'm like, okay, well, there's a trailer, a single wide trailer, and to kind of give a perspective of this location, it's right next to the lake, and there's only one road in, one road out. And so there's multiple different little single wide trailers that are lined up next to the water, down by the edge of the water. So you kind of get a visual for, what's the landscape. Well, that one particular road that goes in is a little bit higher than what the trailer house actually was. Well, when I asked that question, well, do we have eyes on the suspect? Is he in the house? Do you know if he's in the house? Well, at the time, nobody was actually watching the house. So there was some uncertainty whether or not the guy was actually in the house or not. We didn't know. We had zero idea. Well, because nobody actually physically saw him go into the house except the people that were involved. And I believe it was the guy's girlfriend and her son and her brother that were also involved in that. So, with that, we didn't have a whole lot of information, right? And so, the question is like, hey, well, what can we do? Well, we have to establish that we know where the suspect's at. Once we know where we know for a fact the suspect's in this house, absolutely, we'll send the team, we'll come in, we'll take care of our business just like they do, every single day. And we'll go in, we'll take care of business, arrest the suspect, and go on with the investigation. Well, like I said, at the time, nobody was actually watching the house. Nobody had eyes on this house or this trailer house that we were dealing with. Well, so, okay, well, my first thing was, okay, well, we need to set up a perimeter, right? And that's typically what you initially do in that situation. You would set a perimeter up, which is slightly difficult when that's, the only road going to, it's a very heavily wooded area. It's not an open area, a lot of hills down by the lake. And so you don't really have a very good visual. You don't have a very good opportunity to set up a perimeter, hey, let's set a guy up on this mile section, that mile section, or so far from the house in different areas. And, Lieutenant, you've been part of the emergency response team in multiple different situations, in your career that you understand, sometimes it can be difficult to set up a perimeter around, a specific location.
And nobody wants to be on the perimeter.
Nobody wants to be the perimeter guy. And it is what it is.
They want to be in the fight.
Everybody wants to be in the fight. And that's, especially, us as troopers, we want to be in the middle of the action. We want to be in the middle of that fight every single time that we go on that call. And so, of course, even me, I know this isn't technically my call, right? It's not our call as the highway patrol. It's the deputies, it's the sheriff's department. It's their initial call. Well, we're there to help, and we're there to do what we can. Well, so we established, and me and the other troopers established that, okay, well, we're going to be the perimeter units. So, you kind of swallow your pride a little bit, and you're like, okay, we're going to be the perimeter units here. So we progress, we go down the road, and so we go down and we set up a perimeter, and we have multiple trooper cars set up in different locations that way we can see the house. And we had the high ground where we were at, or where I was currently at. And some deputies and other local law enforcement, they kind of went towards the front of the house, down towards the water a little bit. So they had gotten together in a vehicle, and multiple had went down there. So we set up our perimeter, and we were watching this house. And to kind of give a perspective of the house, it's starting to get a little bit dark. It's roughly, I don't remember if it was exactly around 7:15 ish of an evening. So in March at that time, I think daylight savings time, how it is, it's kind of starting to get lighter a little bit later. Unlike now where it's getting dark at 5:30 or 5 o'clock of an evening. So when we pull up, it's starting to get a little dark. It's a very heavily wooded area. So, you're not able to see a whole lot, but obviously we can still see without lights and stuff like that. So when we set our perimeter up, and the sheriff's department, they go down, and they look at the person that's laying in the middle of the front yard, and unfortunately the person was deceased at the time, and it was that's a super tragic event for that family as well. So I feel for them on that deal. And they retrieve the body. They go up to the top of the hill where the staging area was to try to see if there was something that they could do at the time. And we were the perimeter unit, so we were watching this house. Well, this trailer house, on the windows there was insulation, like rolled bat insulation taped on the windows. You could kind of see the pink fiberglass. You see that insulation. You kind of see that pink fiberglass. There was all coverings on every window in the house, which makes it even more difficult. You can't see movement in the house. So we don't truly know if that guy is in the house or not. And, 9 times out of 10, you never know what can happen in a situation. But how many guys are going to actually stay in that house, right? Especially after they've just done what what he did in that situation. And, normally somebody, they're gonna instead of fight, they're gonna flight, right?
What was the relationship between the suspect and the victims?
So the suspect was actually a boyfriend to this lady. Well, it was a domestic dispute between them. Well, they had some issues going on, whatever it might be. Well, they showed up to talk to him, and it was her son and her brother that had actually showed up to either try to de-escalate the situation. I'm not exactly 100% sure, because that all that stuff had happened prior to me actually being there. But when we arrived, the girlfriend's son was unfortunately the young man that was in the front yard, and the girlfriend's brother as well had been shot, and he ended up still surviving. He survived the incident. He's very blessed and lucky as well throughout that. So the girlfriend at the time, she wasn't injured during that altercation or any of the altercations, but the girlfriend's son was actually the one that passed away. So.
So you're up on the perimeter trying to see if this guy is in this trailer house.
Right. So we're up on this perimeter, and like I said, like kind of the way the road sets, road's a little bit higher than this trailer house. So I mean, we're kind of looking down towards it. Obviously, looking behind us, checking our six, making sure like this guy could be in the woods. He may be turning around looking to attack us, be on the offense rather than the defense of us showing up. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and when there's uncertainty,
It's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable, and so we just don't know. But that's what we do. We want to be in the fight, and we want to be in, and that's just so we can take care of business and do our job. And so we're sitting there, we're watching the house. Well, time goes by. We're looking, 45 minutes to an hour almost goes by, and there's nothing. This house doesn't. I don't believe the house had electricity. It may have, may not, but no lights were on in the house. Because once again, you don't know if the guy's in there. Well, we I actually, there was a couple more officers, local PD guys that were close to me by my patrol car, and so I actually moved up towards one of the other troopers' patrol cars, and so we were kind of talking. We were chatting like, hey, we don't know if this guy's in the house. Like, is he up in the woods? We just don't truly know. We didn't have that true, like, for sure. We didn't know. So at the time, our TAC team hadn't been activated. They were aware of the situation, and the rest of the guys. Everybody was aware. Everybody knew, like, hey, here's our call. Here's our situation. Lieutenants start arriving, and captains are starting to get close and type of thing. So we start getting a bigger showing of troopers that are starting to get close to the scene, and so one of the guys at the sheriff's office, he comes up the side of the hill, and he's donning a less lethal shotgun, which we always paint them orange, so that you can delineate the difference between an actual shotgun and a less lethal shotgun. So he walks up the side of this is steep embankment. He walks up to the road, and we're standing behind cover behind this patrol car, and he tells us, because we're kind of like, all right, well, it's always good to have in any type of barricaded situation. It's always good to have a less lethal option. So when he walks up and he says, all right, hey guys, I'm gonna shoot this beanbag round through this back glass of this house so we can gain communication with the guy. So a couple of us troopers looked at each other like, okay, not 100% in agreement with this situation. However, he's still a law enforcement officer, right? He's still making a decision that he felt as though was the right decision.
And it's technically their call still.
It's still their call.
Yeah.
It's not our call. We're still that assisting agency. Like, we're not saying, hey, you can't do this, and like we're taking over this scene. Like we're not doing that at this point. But he comes up, and that's what he states he's going to do. So me and another trooper, we both, we kind of looked at each other a little bit, and he's one of my litter mates as well, Alex Wilson. He and I were pretty close. We worked around each other as well, and we looked at each other and we're like, hey, we have to cover this guy. We made that conscious decision to, like, we left our cover to cover somebody else, and I'm not saying that it's not the ideal thing to do in any situation, because like I said, there's uncertainty of where this guy's at, if he's in the woods or if he's in who knows. So we leave our cover to make sure that we have lethal cover for this deputy at the time. Well, he shoots this beanbag round into this back glass of this house. Well, pain sets in, not knowing what's going. I mean, just chaos ensues.
What was he shooting?
He had a shotgun.
Okay.
Yeah, so he shot a shotgun out of a back glass of a house. So you and I both know with with shotguns, there's multiple pellets that are coming out of a shotgun shell. Very, very blessed in my situation, and very lucky that I didn't get the whole entire shotgun shell. First off, everybody kind of thought it was shrapnel, and no, it was actually pellet from the shotgun itself. And so when I initially get shot, when I fall to the ground, and then I think the work really goes in, and I have a lot of thanks to give to the troopers that were around me, that immediately they went to work, and that happens. That's where a lot of our training kicks in. When something bad does happen, then we at drop of a hat, where we light switch, it flips on and we go to work. Well, I fall to the ground, and your first thing is, okay, I got to get away from this. So Trooper Wilson and some of the other troopers, they Ben Bertram as well, he's a retired guy now, and Chad Backward as well, he was there, and those guys, they pulled me back behind the patrol car, and started kind of assessing the situation, assessing me at the time, and I can sit here, and a lot of people ask, like, what did it feel like? Well, it was absolutely the worst feeling I've ever had in my life. It hurt a lot, and the pain as it just progressed, and it got worse and worse and worse, and
Did you immediately lose visibility there?
Yes, yeah. I lost visibility in my right eye, and actually, I mean, obviously, I covered my face up at the time because I didn't know what I'd been shot with at the time. I didn't know, I had a lot of uncertainty what was happening. I knew I'd been shot though. That's the one thing that I can say. I knew that I'd been shot, and they're kind of in that moment. There was that split second, and a lot of guys that are either involved in a shooting or have been involved in a shooting. Know that it kind of slows down a little bit.
Yeah.
Everybody always say, slow motion. Well, I had that slow motion feeling as the shot was coming towards me. It was almost like, it's kind of a weird way to say it, but it's like you see it go into your eye type of deal. And it's kind of weird to say, but it's like in that instant it was slow, and then it hit, and then it was chaos. So when they pulled me back behind the patrol car, I remember looking at the guy saying, "Hey, how bad is it?" Because you feel your body start warming up, you start things start feeling off and feeling bad, and you
Start thinking, what if?
start thinking what if you truly do. You're like, oh my goodness, I just got shot, and it's like in we as troopers, we have that fight in us, right? And you just never know in whatever situation where there's been a lot of troopers that have been shot. That you could talk and they'll probably give you the same the same response. Like you just don't know what's happening to you. You don't know how bad it is. And I remember as I was laying on the ground, looking up at the guys, and I was like, "Hey, how bad is it?" And they said, "Well, move your hand." Because I had my hands over my face and over my right eye, and because that was the pain was centered on that right hand side of my face, and they said move your hand, because you feel your body heating up, you think, oh man, I'm bleeding out, like this is what it is like to die at the time, because that's what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm literally dying in this moment, and I moved my hand, and and I remember one of the guys. Because I could still obviously I could see out of my left eye, but I kind of like, as I moved my hands, I kind of tried to look up at him, and I remember seeing him, and he said, "Cover it back up. You're good. You're fine. You're just stay in the fight." And I remember hearing that constantly, "Stay in the fight. Stay in the fight." And I'm like, is he just saying that to be a good partner? Like, is he just saying that? Like, is it a lot worse?
Did you want him to say, "Jeff, that looks really bad"?
Well, you
That's
just,
what you were expecting,
It's
maybe?
kind of what I was expecting. I was expecting hey, this is awful. Like, you just, I don't know, you just don't know. And so when the response was, hey, just cover it back up. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. Just stay in the fight. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, did my partner just lie to me just to make me feel better? But in reality, I'm thankful for that. And because they were going to work. They got their med bag out. They got their med kit. They started wrapping my head, and I, of course, couldn't see anything on my left eye, for my right eye for sure, but my left eye, because they started wrapping my head in bandages and all kinds of stuff, and so hearing the chaos that was happening and ensuing at the time, but it was controlled to the fact that I owe everything to my partners. I truly do. Because what was happening internally, the injury that had occurred, had they not been as quick as they were, had they not have done what they did, obviously my situation could have been a lot worse. So they wrapped the bandage up around my head, and I believe one of the deputies' pickups, because they had some pickups that were down there. They drove it up, and they put me in the back seat of that pickup, kind of, laid me in the back seat, did the best they could, and they took me up to the top of the hill where the staging area was. So up there, they'd actually already landed a helicopter at the time, because with the injuries to the other people and everybody that was involved, like they had already called for a helicopter. There were multiple ambulance and EMS departments that were part
That's
of that.
best case scenario.
And absolutely best case
Those
scenario.
life flight guys are some of the best paramedics you'll ever find.
Absolutely, and they're super special. I don't remember their names, unfortunately, or I would, tell them thank you again to this day, and if hopefully I have that opportunity to see those guys again, or at some point in my life. But when they brought me up to the top of the hill, they put me in an ambulance at first. They start their IVs, all the local EMS guys, and you get to think about it. Like, I'm super close with all these EMS and firefighters and guys that are close there because, I've worked there for, 5 to 6 years. And, so like, these guys know who I am. I know who they are. And I know that they're highly trained individuals, and they do a really, really good job where, back home where we're at. And then I know it's obviously good, throughout the state as well. But I trusted the people that were with me. I trusted the people that were working on me. And then I remember laying on the gurney there inside of the ambulance, and the flight medics, they show up and they come in and they say, all right, hey, we're going to load this guy up. We're going to get him in the helicopter. And we're going to fly him to Joplin, which Joplin was a bigger city that's close to where we were at. They have, higher trauma unit in their hospitals where they're at. So they loaded me up in the helicopter, and they I'll tell you right now, they took really, really good care of me. They're very, very intelligent, highly trained professionals that do a really, really good job. And looking back, I remember, some of the troopers that were still there. I remember them talking to me, as they were loading me on the helicopter. Some of the guys that were showing up at the scene, So they're like, hey man, just get better. You're gonna be okay. And there was a lot of positives that came from it. And at the time, did anybody truly know? Did I know? Did they know? Probably not. There was like I said, a lot of uncertainty, and I've repeated that, but there was a lot of uncertainty of the situation at hand, of what was happening. So they fly me to Joplin, and like I said, COVID had just hit, so nobody's allowed in the hospital. It's just a crazy time, right, and that we were living in, right? So I get to the hospital, they take me inside into the ER, and obviously I couldn't see what was going on, but hearing multiple officers from the Missouri agencies, the Missouri Highway Patrol, the Joplin PD guys, the Newton County guys, were like, there is a plethora of law enforcement officers from multiple agencies that show up to the hospital for this. So you look at the relationships that we have with not just other troopers, but other agencies in statewide, across the name, different states, between us and Missouri, or us in Kansas, us in Arkansas, us in Texas. Like, we have that strong bond and relationship of first responders. And so, like, I look at that, and it kind of gives me goosebumps to think about it, because those people were there. They were there for me in that time, right? And the doctors are doing what they're doing, and at the time, the pain's not getting any better. I'll tell you that at that moment. But just knowing that I had the support around me at the time was just absolutely unbelievable. So it's kind of a surreal moment to think about through all the chaos. I obviously at the time I may have not noticed it, but I look back at that and I'm like, look at the nurses, look at the doctors, look at the law enforcement, look at the flight medics, and the pilot, or look at the other guys that were around me, my partners that got me from that spot on that road to the helicopter to the hospital, and then all that stuff adds up to where we're here today.
Everybody doing their job at the best of their ability to make sure you're good to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I owe everything to all those people. I'm extremely grateful, extremely thankful, and the support that I've had throughout that time, even from then to now, is just, it's unbelievable to think.
So how did they deal with the suspect after you got shot?
So, that was kind of something, as I went into surgery there at the hospital at the time, and nobody was actually able to stay with me at the hospital, even my parents at the time. I wasn't married at the time.
Because of COVID?
Because of COVID,
Yeah, okay.
because the hospitals had shut it down, and it was like, hey, nobody's coming in here. Well, I remember the local law enforcement guys were like, we're coming in there. And like they were like, we don't care about your hospital policy at this point. We're going to make sure this trooper's okay. And I even, I'll go back to even as far as, one of my partners, he was off duty at the time. He went to my parents' house and got my mom and brought her up to the hospital. and they told them that, hey, you guys can't come in this hospital. And of course, him being a trooper, he's like, hey, you're gonna get this guy's mom in this ER because this needs to happen. Well, of course, some of the local troopers from Missouri came out and were like, hey, yeah, they're with us, like, come on. So, I was able to have, some partners also as well that were there. And so like throughout that time, I go through surgery, and like I said, nobody was able to stay, but my lieutenant at the time, Brian McSlaro, he actually stayed in the hospital room with me. They were able to, they let him come up there. So he was upstairs, and he was in my room. Of course, when I kind of woke up from, after the surgery later on in the middle of the night, I would ask him, like, hey, did they get the guy? Because that's the first thing, as soon as I wake up, it's not like, oh, hey, am I okay? It's like, hey, did they get the guy? Is everybody else all right? Like, anybody else? No, hopefully nobody else is hurt or injured in this situation. And he said, no, not yet. The guy's still in the house. And I kind of vaguely remember some of those conversations, not the whole conversations that he and I were having in the middle of the night. Obviously, medications and things like that, but I do remember asking him, and I'd go back to sleep. I'd wake back up and be like, hey, they get the guy yet?
So this is about 12 hours after the event.
Yeah, roughly. I want to say it was around, could have been about 7 a.m., 8 a.m. So you're looking about 12 hours after, my shooting occurs, right? And, this guy is, he's obviously still in this house. Our TAC team immediately, they were activated.
Yeah.
You go back and listen to the audio, and it was like, hey, roll the TAC team, get those guys here. Let's take care of business. And, I hats off to our TAC team as well. Those are great guys. A lot of the guys that were there are still on the team today, and some have moved on to do different and better things. But those guys do a great job. They do a really, really good job, and we see it all the time. And they all came up, and they were doing everything that they could at the time. And they from deploying gas into the house to doing all the things that we know the tag team has to do to try to get a suspect to comply and come out. Well, the guy was adamant that he didn't want to come out at the time, and time goes on, and finally the guy does give up. I think the guy had actually shot at the troopers multiple times. I mean, I remember talking to a couple of the guys, and rounds are bouncing off to the Bearcat, and it was a whole mess at the time. Well, the suspect, for whatever reason, he decided that it was time to give up. And I believe, talking to the guys, the sun had started to come up, so you have a whole entire night of no daylight, and all of this happening, and the guy's not complying. He's not coming out of this house, and for whatever reason, I don't know what the reason is. Maybe he had some type of come to Jesus situation or moment where he knew that he wasn't going to make it out of that situation, in a positive area. So he makes that decision, and he decided to give up, and he came out of the house. I believe he came out with his hands up, and we look at that, and we want all those situations to come out with a positive ending, right? So the guy came out, the troopers arrested the guy, and then obviously did all their booking and took care of all the business as far as that was concerned.
Do you know if he made any statements about your shooting or anything like that, the suspect?
Exact statements, I can't quote anything. I remember throughout the court process, it was a long process. It took a while, once we kind of got into the whole thick of it, because obviously I was a part of it. And after my situation, and you add into, he shot 2 other people, he killed 1 person, and that it was a mess. It was an all out mess in court. It was kind of just a mess of administrative.
And you testified?
Yes, I had to testify. I had to get up in front of the court at the time, and we did impact statements and things like that to talk to the court about it. And once again, here we have COVID during all this time, and it's just a little bit different setting, it's different setup, and it's not just like every day like it is now,
Yeah.
like so. got up on the stand, I testified, gave my side of the story, kind of like what I'm telling you guys now, and went through all of that, and had to do it a couple different times, and both times, I mean, the guy was there, and at the time, he typically just had his head down most of the time. It wasn't like making eye contact type of thing, and he never really said anything to me. But I remember after the that final hearing, there was I want to say there was a subtle sorry out of it, and so I look at that and I kind of go back to just kind of thinking about, where's your mind, like, and this guy just, obviously some time had gone by. This guy shot me, killed somebody, and shot another person. And when I got up off the stand, and and there was a lot of troopers there as well, but when I got up off the stand and I was walking down the aisle, and that guy stood up and he turned and looked at me, and of course he had handcuffs and stuff on, and he reached out to shake my hand. There was a moment there that I didn't want to shake the guy's hand. There was a moment that I remember, like it was really quick, that I was like, the last thing I want to do is shake this guy that just single-handedly uprooted and completely changed my life forever. Mm-hmm. But then, I look back at that, and I stuck my hand out and I shook the guy's hand, and he, at a very low voice, he said, "I'm sorry, man. I really am." And I just kind of nodded and I went on. And, that day and that moment, I kind of replay that moment a lot, because it has affected, not just that moment, that the whole situation has affected my life, mentally, physically, in so many different aspects. But I remember that moment where there was anger. There was anger towards, and animosity towards that person. But I also look back at, people they make decisions, and sometimes their decisions are pushed by either substances, or whether the guy was under the influence, whether, mental health also plays a role. And, I look at it, and we're all still human, right? We are. And, should you look out on the cover, like, should I forgive the guy for what he did? Well, I don't necessarily forgive him for what he did, but I still have a heart when it comes down to it, and understand that bad things that happen, and and that whole situation was bad, and it's not a good thing. But he's gonna live out probably the rest of his life in prison, and the judge made the decision on what they were gonna do, and however he has grown, obviously I don't know, and one can hope and look on a positive side of a negative situation, and say you can hope that somebody like that, in that situation or in other situations across the nation or our state, can hopefully better themselves from the bad things that they do. I've had a lot of conversations with bad guys, even on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. And guys that you take to jail. You have those conversations, and a lot of that is about the conversations maybe that one conversation that you have with that person could potentially change their life for the better, because that's what we're trying to do, is change people's lives, right? And for the positive. And if for whatever reason we can try to look at the positive side of it instead of just the negative, because trust me, there was a lot of negative that came out of this, and there was a lot of like hate and a lot of like just anger that was involved with that. But I look at, I'm a very big Christian guy, and that's a big part of my life, and I kind of, it's kind of one of those like what would Jesus do in that situation? You know, would he turn around? Would he have just walked right by the guy and, you know, never stopped and gave that person the time of day? You know, you look at it and some people may say, no, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have stopped and you shouldn't have shook that guy's hand. You shouldn't have accepted an apology from a guy that did what he did. So in that situation, obviously, I just felt as though that it was the right thing to do. You know.
What was he sentenced to?
If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was over, I want to say 35 plus years in prison. I believe he was in his later 50s at the time. So you know, that, who knows? I mean, if the guy does get out, he gets out, but his health wasn't very good. I don't know if it's any good now. I don't even know where he's at now. You know,
Yeah.
so it's one of those things. I mean, I don't keep up with it anymore. It's not, you know, nothing that I pay attention to. All I can hope is that the guy can figure out, you know,
Change his life.
change his life for the
Yeah.
better. You know.
Yeah.